But unfortunately, I think that's an ideology that runs deep within PT schools, which doesn't allow you to think about problem solving or business culture or how to change the dynamic, right?
Yeah.
It's just about speed. Get them in, get them out, boom. And it's just a bad model.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Brian Wolfe and Owen Campbell, the founders of PhysioGrowth Consulting. They dive into urgency in healthcare marketing strategies, competing for attention in a crowded market, entrepreneurial thinking in healthcare, and lastly, tech-driven solutions that are transforming healthcare delivery. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
This topic of like business education for practice owners, mostly because I come from the non-healthcare world, and it's fascinating to me because like 15 years ago, for example, you couldn't find any content on how to build a tech startup. Like you couldn't. And then all of a sudden it seems like blogs blew up. And the next thing you know, you had accelerator programs, which were like 12-week mini business schools for technology companies. And now like it's just like a mature industry. And I look at PT and I'll just use that term broadly, PT, OT, speech, whatever, is that like I've done keynotes at Texas Tech and a bunch of other universities, and I've gotten lucky enough to meet like some of the deans of these programs. One of the common things is, I'm probably never going to get invited back now that I say this, but one of the most common things is there's like zero business education. Whereas like I went to engineering school at George Mason University, and a lot of, at least in your first year, you had a bunch of 100 level classes to at least expose you to stuff. Now, whether or not it was relevant is not the point of this comment. The other thing you were talking about just a moment ago that I thought was really interesting, I didn't realize that this was a branch, that I think you were saying that PT was a branch of nursing.
So I think it was the polio epidemic, but we were basically the nurses who did all the physical stuff, and then it became like, okay, we're a section of the hospital because sometimes when people break their legs, they may want to learn to walk again. And these guys are better at that than the average nurse. And then it just it became its own profession. I don't know. Don't quote me on the dates, but
I think it was like World War I or II. It was something, I think you're dead on.
Yeah. So that's where the kind of way I think we don't get a lot of business education is that for basically the 20th century, we were very much a secondary or tertiary practitioner. And so we ate because somebody else passed us something, right? And now with direct access being pretty universal across the country 10 years ago, I think, you've now had a lot of PTs who are like, wait a second, and Brian was one of these where he just was entrepreneurial. So he started and just did it. Right. Whereas I wasn't, but now I'm seeing the light in these 10 years of like, wait, I thought that guy was an idiot by starting a business. Like no one's ever going to pay cash for this. I call Brian an idiot on and off. But then now I'm kind of looking at it like, oh yeah, this is just basic business education. So then I taught myself a lot through like podcasts and all these different things. And then I kind of married that with what I was learning in the insurance based, the monster mega clinics, right. With private equity. And then I was like, okay, I can do this. Like, this is not as hard as I was led to believe.
I know this is probably not the topic you guys want to riff on today, but it's near and dear to my heart because I I don't come from healthcare. I come from tech and venture capital and stuff like that. And it's interesting when we think about, I don't know, if you think about like mint.com from 10, 15 years ago, I was lucky enough to be one of the early investors in that. And I think if you were to time travel back and ask that team what they thought they were, they would not say that they were like a banking technology company. They would say that they were a user acquisition company that happened to provide an online banking tool, an online budgeting tool. And I know that sounds like wordsmithing, but there's something important there because like, even when you think about physical therapy practices, what are they other than patient acquisition
Yeah.
machines that need to deliver great healthcare. I feel like that's a taboo thing to talk about, by the way. I feel like what little I know, you guys have been in the industry longer than
Not
me,
with us.
but
Yeah, exactly.
but I feel like in the 3 or 4 years I've been in this industry now, I feel like it's taboo to talk about anything other than patient care. And it's super fashionable to talk about how little money you make.
I think personally that needs to be a narrative that's stripped out of PT school personally. And I'll tell you, because I know you know we're talking about it, and I've been teaching in colleges as well. And the reality as it is, and again, I hope this doesn't not get me invited back, but the reality is it's the first year that I co-taught with somebody, other than my wife, by the way, who actually taught a clinical administration class and has some business acumen, right? Like every other person, including when Owen and I were in school, where it was like a manager in a place of some kind. And so the reality is, like, when you're talking about what you're talking about, basically it's like there's just a lack of understanding of what what the entrepreneurial spirit is, what the business mind needs to be. Like, I was talking about an employee today, and we are just going through, like, in fact, Owen, you're like this, because he was talking about a golf program he wants to put together. And I was like, oh, it's so funny. Me and Owen talk about this at endless nauseum. Like, you just got to talk about this process. So we were going through the thing, and I can just see it's like head spinning, right? In like a good way, where like, and I had this moment in my head, I'm like, holy crap, I just dumped like it not PT school, but just years of experience on this kid all in one 40-minute session. And I'm like, let's review that real quick. Here's how we're gonna, you know what I mean? It's like, and so when you think about it, it's just, I think the problem is, to your point, it's like we work so much in physical therapy school on treating patients, how to get people better. And the mentality, I tell the story all the time, is we had a professor that me and Owen both really liked. And he basically said to me, he goes, A students will get a patient better in 6 visits. B students will get somebody better in 8 visits. And C students will get somebody better in 10 visits. And I've recognized, number one, I'm a better clinician now than I was 15 years ago. And that's just not true. Like I definitely keep patients longer than anything. In fact, I think it's a preconceived notion. But unfortunately, I think that's an ideology that runs deep within PT schools, is like, which doesn't allow you to think about problem solving or business culture, or how to change the dynamic, right? It's just about speed. Get them in, get them out, boom, right? And it's just a bad model.
But so this is like, all right, so I love that you guys are willing to riff on this. So let me paint a distinction from the non-healthcare world and then bring it back to this. And I think you're going to connect the dots really quick, I think. Or you're going to tell me I'm full of shit. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, this episode is all about fun and profit. Okay, so like if you were to go to any e-commerce company, pick any company you've ever bought anything. It could be Nike running shoes. It could be jewelry for your spouse, whatever. Pick any e-commerce based business that does that sort of thing. I guarantee you that if you were to go inside that business and you said, hey, show me your cohort analysis, which is not something we think about in our industry, they'd pull it out. And I'll explain what it is in a moment. If you said, show me your cost of acquisition, they'd pull it out. You'd say lifetime value, pull it out. They'd give you all these numbers. Let me tie it back to what you just said, Brian, because I think it's really interesting. The whoever you heard say that is basically saying they're like spectrum for this A, B, and C player is really about number of visits to get them better, which I'm not going to argue whether it's right or wrong. I'm just going to say, God, it's very myopic. Because I'll use myself as an example. I like to run marathons. It's cheaper than therapy. And, twice a year, statistically, I do something stupid. I do something stupid every day, but in the context of physical therapy, probably twice a year, right? So ballpark, let's just pretend, let's just split the difference between your A, B, and C player. Let's just say it takes 8 visits to get me better, right? That's potentially 16 visits a year that I'm worthwhile. And I think this is the gap that a lot of these practice owners aren't getting exposed to, trained on, encouraged to think about, is like, it's not enough to just make me feel better. Like, that is table stakes. Like, if I spend 8 visits with you and you screw it up or don't make me feel better, that's not good. So healthcare and better outcomes is table stakes, but the differentiator between a profitable, cash flowing money machine and the opposite is really retaining me as a customer. And it's crazy to me that real estate agents, I've never been one, and I don't think I have very many real estate friends, so maybe I won't piss anybody off. Think about, I'm sure it's the same in Connecticut and in Arizona. Like, these people will just hammer your inbox your mailbox, and they're giving you like, magnets with the local high school football game, and it's got their name on it or whatever, right? And I know I'm a sample size of one. I've used the same guy, Kevin, to sell my house 4 times in 20 years. Like, think about how much money, if a guy in an industry like that is willing to put marketing in to get me to come back to him or to remember him 5 years later, why aren't PTs doing this? This is like the absolute insane part to me, because this industry is just so fascinating. It's just so fashionable for practice owners to complain about how little money they're making, when you ask them, like, show me your calendar, it's like 100% patient care. Even put aside the 40 hours of work for a minute, just put aside like how many hours a week. It's like 100% patient care. And it's like, okay, when are you working on the business? Oh, 0%. Oh, okay. Okay. So I see the problem,
I'll go back. I'll do a brief history lesson to give you kind of a reason why PTs are so itchy about
man,
money.
I feel like and you got to get like a fancy school costume, teach us stuff.
We're gonna get the thing that you graduate with, right? The big robe.
I know, right? It's actually how I walk around my house. It's really weird. So no, but the two big things, right, is chiropractors have always been the boogeyman to PT. We have very big of an overlap of territory. I don't think it's a good thing, but it is a thing. And the whole thing was like,
that will get you punched in the face, I think, by the way. You say that out
that's
loud.
it. And that was the part, right, where it was, well, they just whack them and crack them 10 minutes hot, they're not doing right by the patient, right? So there's that, right? And there's a whole other podcast on why that's outdated. The second thing is there's a company called Health South, and they had massive Medicare fraud. And business schools do teach this when they do healthcare education, right? And they do any MBAs or Master of Public Health or anything like that. And they were just massively defrauding Medicare, right? And I actually happened to work for one of the companies that got sprouted off and sold in that legal settlement. And so there was, especially PTs now that was in the history that the professors were teaching. The professors lived through that. So they were very much, we don't want fraud. So make sure you're not overutilizing care. And it's, especially when HMO switched to now deductible based PPO, all that stuff. Now then it becomes, are you wasting our money? Right. And these are all things that kind of came together as people are going through school. So that's part of the reason why Brian was saying that 6, 8, 10 ABC student was very much a thing. And what we try and do when we're talking with our people in our mastermind group is just say, look, you're trying to benefit somebody. You need to get them better. What better place in a PT's office? Isn't it better than being on their back with their heart ripped open? Let's get them moving. Let's see what wellness things we can do. Let's see functional stuff, and that conversation is starting to happen. And it should be in the scope of, if I make more money and I have more time, I can better benefit my community. And that's what we look for. But the hardest part is that's new, right? The people are starting to get some traction, but it's not your average PT.
I think too, I was going to say, I was like, when you talk about like the cost of acquiring customer, your cohort studies, that kind of thing, like how many people also do say, hey, do you have an SOP for like an angry customer or an upset billing situation? Or what's your cultural values? What's your company mission? Like, we don't talk about that at all in PT school, right? There's nothing around customer service. And because I think one of the things in private practice, particularly if you're talking to certain people within our industry, right? If we're talking about, because I bet if we asked the CEO of a hospital, they would know the answer to some of those questions, right? But because you're talking with private practice who are physical therapists that are then going in that entrepreneurial route, there's no background in the business side. And I think, I give Owen credit for having more of a business plan. People ask me like, what was your business plan? I was like, it was called Get Patients. That was the business plan. There was no fucking business plan on anything else. It was Get Patients. And so what happens is you get into a point where you're just like, get patients, get patients, get patients, get patients, to the point where you're now all of a sudden you've got the patients. And the next step is, well, there is no other step, right? It was just, we never thought that through. And now you're so friggin' busy that you're like, how do I keep moving forward? And I think when you think about the business side of it, we were able to scale an evolution quite quickly when, to your point, we were able to start taking a step back and as a team really building the business and understanding that aspect. And I think that in fact, now we actually look for people who are super busy as solopreneurs, but struggle to grow because they're great partners for us to buy into. Because we've recognized now they've got the community we need, and we tripled the size of a practice in 6 months just by dumping in our systems. And we're like, just keep doing exactly what you're doing. We'll hire, we'll help you do everything else. We'll manage stuff. Boom. You've got the fire going. We're going to dump the gasoline on it. And so when you start talking about SEO and sales meetings and like, that's where I think of somebody like Jerry when we're talking about like customer service stuff and front desk and like, those kind of concepts are so unique. And I also think that, or not unique, they're so not unique, I suppose, right? Is the idea. But I think the one thing that I heard a mentor say to me when I first started my business that you kind of mentioned was, I was like, well, our practice is different because, and he was like, let me give you an idea, man. He's like, no business is different. Like we talk about this, people ask about PT with cash based or insurance. Like cash based is a new thing because it's like, oh, let me tell you how I got my cash based practice. The cash based practice is get patients, retain clients, and figure out how to move them up into an LTV so they make you more money. To your point, like how do you retain them and make more money and upsell them?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then ultimately it's just, then if you want to scale it, it's how do you keep stacking that process?
I don't mean to hate on the cash pay people, but the funny thing is like everybody talking about cash pay is just selling a course. Rule number one of information marketing is like, if there's a course about it, you probably are not going to make any money on it. It's ridiculous to me. I mean, I don't have many friends anyway, so it's not like I'm going to lose a lot. But the point is that I just find I know I sound cynical or whatever, right? But I love what you said there earlier about no business plans and stuff. I think I kind of jokingly and half seriously tell people that going from 0 to 1, 0 to 1 customer, 0 to 1 patient, 0 to 1 credential, whatever it is, it looks more like a bar fight than a business plan. Like the chair's coming out of somewhere, and like when I think about that story I told earlier about education in the tech world 15 years ago, I don't know if it's going to look the same here, but I think it's going to kind of feel directionally aligned. I think one of the things we did, and so we have this accelerator program that I helped start about 15 years ago. And, it was this 12-week course, and every week had a different theme, and none of it had to do with the actual thing that these companies sold, right? Because it was like, okay, here's what marketing 101 looks like. Here's what sales 101, and let's just dive into that. What is marketing 101? Today, it's here's how the Facebook algorithms work. Here's what you should be doing on TikTok. Boom, boom, boom. And it's designed to teach you 80% of what you need to figure out where to Google next, or how it'll teach you 80% of what you need to figure out who's blowing smoke at you if you're going to hire like somebody to do it. So we had things on like marketing and finance and all this stuff. And on the back side of it, not only were we investing in these companies, but we were also getting another couple percent of the ownership to do that because we wanted to be we wanted everybody to be incentivized to grow this thing. I have this sneaking feeling there's something similar to that in this industry. I know there's there's the traditional private equity model, just buy it out and put in the systems. And then you have these MSO models that are like all over the board, but, very similar. And I think this is kind of really maybe more of the venture model where it's like, what if you took tiny stakes in 200 of these practices? I mean, maybe that's too much, but maybe you take tiny 5-10% stakes in, 20 or 30 of these over the course of 3 years, and you're all incentivized to grow. So more of a statement than a question in there, but I think we're going to have to see more education here, and
well, that micro
this is the part that blows me
acquisition.
away. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, real quick. This is the part that blows me away, and I will admit before I even say this that I'm a blood-sucking capitalist. I admit it, and I'm okay with it sometimes, most of the time, all the time actually. But here's the thing: I was at PPS a couple months ago, and I was like on this on the escalator at this hotel or whatever. And I'd gotten to know this one guy there, and I won't mention his name, and he can comment somewhere on here on YouTube or whatever if he wants to. But he was like, "What are you even doing here, man?" and he was asking in the context of what's a tech guy doing? He's like, "What's a tech guy doing here?" Right? And so that's the context. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And we're just, if you can imagine, we're going down this stupid long escalator. And so it's this awkward thing where he's fighting me as we go slowly down this thing. And I was like, "Okay, you want the street answer or the real or the corporate answer?" And he's like, well, now I want both." And I was like, "Well, the street answer is money, man." And he was like, "All right, I got questions. What's the other one?" I was like, help better patient outcomes, I think is what I'm supposed to say. And that's coming from me, running a, that's coming from me, CEO of a, EMR and RCM company, right? I'm like, I guess better outcomes, whatever. He's like, "So tell me about the street answer." And I was like, "You're all's industry. Y'all are weird, man." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, in the tech world, if we see a total addressable market of like $500 million, we're like, oh man, that's a huge market. Wow, let's go invest in that. Oh my gosh, and when Mint.com sold for $200 million, we're all like, wow, that's a lot of money. Amazing. Yeah. Hey, high five,
Awesome.
And
Good
I've been
job.
lucky enough over the last 20 years now to have invested in like 400 or 500 of those kind of exits, right? And so this guy's like, I don't get it. And I was like, dude, I'm no genius, but healthcare spending is like 20% of our GDP. Musculoskeletal broadly is about, what, about 10, 20% of that? Let's just call it a $4 trillion.
Someone goes to their PCP.
And so he's like, okay, whatever. And I'm like, do you not understand basic math? I'm like, I don't see a $4 billion opportunity in MSK. I see $4,000 billion opportunities. And he still didn't get it at the bottom. And I was like, Mike, you'll never make it in venture capital, by the way. But my point I was poorly trying to articulate is that if we think about technology, people forget, like, I won't make you guys tell me your age, but I'm 43. I'm one of the last generations that lived pre-iPhone and post-iPhone. I lived pre-social media and post-social media, and think about like the massive companies that have come out of tech that didn't even exist, like PayPal, eBay, Facebook, TikTok, right? And again, those came from markets that were considered very tiny, that had not been proven. And now we look at healthcare and we're like, big ass market, totally proven revenue streams. In theory, like, more tech people should be coming over here because, I was saying to Owen in the pre-show, it's like, the funny thing about it is that I, just like every other tech person, thought that healthcare was heavily regulated. It kept me out of it for a long time. And then a story for another time is how I got into it. But then when I got into it, I'm like, oh, HIPAA, that's what you think is hard? Man, the tech world is way more regulated. Like, holy cow.
Right? It's crazy.
I'm like, this is the Wild West. You're just telling me to just keep 3 things of patient data away from other. This is like child's play. So anyway, I'm like the worst Tony Robbins kind of guy for this, but there was a poorly articulated thing to say that, like, I think practice owners stand to make the most amount of money. I'll make a prediction here, or a statement, and you guys take over. I think that two things. Number one, I think individual practice owners in the best position to make lots of money, like millions of dollars a year on a practice. I think you could do that. That's maybe assertion number one. And number two, I would say this industry being as fragmented as it is, like, meaning there's so many practice owners out there, there's so many of these small ones, and private equity is kind of swooping in to kind of capitalize on that fragmentation. I would say that the second assertion would be that whole layer of practice owners, of PT, OT, and speech, that entire layer of practice owners combined represents the biggest threat and opportunity to, like, the future of whatever this is going to be. Now, let me pause there because there's a lot to unpack if you want to, but I'm just long on this whole thing. I'm just so long on the whole thing. And I just find it really interesting how cynical practice owners are. So pause, let's go wherever you want on this, because this is probably not the conversation you wanted to have today.
I'm 37 and I spent a lot of money on a degree, so I'm also long on physical therapy.
Yeah.
So no, I agree with you. I think that a lack of business knowledge makes people not see opportunities. What do they say? You don't make your own. Luck doesn't just happen. It's the ability to recognize an opportunity, right? And I think that we don't, as a profession, don't have enough business knowledge forced upon us in PT school, or honestly the desire to learn it, right? Because there's people can get a much better job just by looking at factors of economics, right? So there are way less PTs than there are people who need them, right? We have every single person on your block knows what physical therapy is, and almost all of them have an opinion on if they like it versus chiropractic, or if they like it versus massage or whatever. So we don't have to spend advertising to inform people what we do, right? And you just basically just open up something on the side of the block. You're going to get a lot of people because we take insurance and we're prioritized by insurance. Yep. So there's somebody subsidizing our clients coming into our office, right?
Yep.
So we have massive, massive advantages. And the hardest problem is that because we can't think, like a business person, like an entrepreneur, like a venture capitalist who's like, well, what if we did this? And what if we pulled this lever? And what if we did that? We basically say, well, insurance reimbursement rates suck, so everything sucks. And we don't sit there and say like, well, okay, but maybe if I added fitness, or maybe if I learned how to market, or maybe if I, knew how to, like you said, if I don't want to be the one doing all the Facebook ads, at least know enough so that I know when a guy's screwing me for his digital ad spend, right?
Yeah.
And we just have practice owners that, again, you can make a good amount of money just taking insurance and doing it at, a decent enough clip not to tick anybody off and have to rehire maybe once or twice a year, right? And we just don't have that ingenuity, right? And on a business sense, right? Now, the nice thing is I see that changing, right? With the new generation of PTs coming out. But the bad part about that is it's not there. It's slow, and we need people to kind of kick it in the pants.
I think too, real quick, I think a lot of it is from a healthcare perspective. You've got some very smart people that took a lot of time to get doctorate degrees in college, right? And there's a lot of paralysis by analysis, right? There's a lot of poor mindsets with that's been driven in there. And so I think when you start getting to a point where you're like, listen, I want to, like, if you have the capitalist mindset in healthcare, there's a lot of PTs that are like, well, that's not how you should be thinking. You should be thinking about like how to help patients. And it's like, well, hold on, if I can help patients and make money, that's way better than if I can help patients and not make money, right? Number one. And number two, show me the fucking physical therapist that doesn't want to make more money, and I'll tell you, you know what I mean? Like, the person who doesn't want to make any money, come work for me. I'd love to put you in a great system because I'll pay you nothing, no problem. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's a lot of that aspect of like this martyring type of feeling. And I think unfortunately culturally, I think that there is an aspect of people thinking like if you're making more money in healthcare, you're evil. And the reality is like, look no further than that United Healthcare CEO, right? Just getting like whacked. And I think a lot of when we think about the aspect is I wish more physical therapists thought to work backwards, right? Okay, this is the population I want to serve. I want to help these people. How can I also make money at it? And if you do that, you can create a business model around that. And just like to Owen's point, you can just problem solve that. So if I have a certain amount of people, like you could do this. I was talking about this last year when I was teaching. It was one group wanted to work with not like they wanted to be basically a not for profit to a degree. They want to be like, all we want to do is help patients who have like Medicaid. And I was like, okay, then think about this. Like you got patients with Medicaid. That means like it's low income people. That means you have an aspect of maybe you're getting reimbursed $55 a visit. How would you get to a point where you can make money, right? Because realize that landlord doesn't really give a crap whether you're serving people at $55 an hour or if you're doing it at 10, you know what I mean? Like there's an aspect of how to build this system and we got to build it, right?
Or put it in their language of how do you get to the fact that you can treat more than just one clinician worth of thing, right? That's why I like to spin it on people where they say they're like, oh, I only want to do Medicaid in that example. And I say, okay, well, wouldn't it be much more altruistic and beneficial for your community if you had 6 locations that did this, right? Or like 6 locations that favored Medicaid, but also had 5 or 6 other cash upsells that would allow them to do this. And then it's like, oh, you mean I could be good for my whole region? Well, yeah, you can, right? If you just kind of, like you said, to get rid of that whole, like, sometimes you got to speak their language.
And I think that paralysis by analysis, it's like, well, but I just won't make any money at that. And I'll just do it that way. And it's like, well, you're a ding dong, right? Like, I don't know how to else tell you that. Like, there's an aspect of just like, there's a way to also problem solve and build that puzzle. And all of a sudden, and by the way, it's okay that you do that. It's okay that you make money doing what you love to do. That's like what people do all the time, right? And so to your point about being long on the healthcare side, I think people are being really short-sighted in certain things. It's a service-based business, so I do think that it takes time to build something meaningful, but that's okay, right? And like giving people that alternative to say, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is how you're going to do it, and really building a model and going back to the basics like we were talking about earlier is like, just find patients, acquire, figure out the next step, how to bridge this gap. Yes, there's going to be some pain. Yes, there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back at times. Yes, there's going to be patients that are going to leave you. Yes, there's going to be retention problems. Like these are all things you just have to plan for and build structure around, because that's part of building a business. It's that simple. And then and guess what? What the coolest part is, as you start really getting the ball rolling, you can really get creative and start making a huge impact on your community.
Owen, I think you're touching on a topic. Okay, so this topic we're talking about that Owen sort of like opened up a can of worms on, I think is a really important one. And I think I would start by saying that it's important for everybody to remember, and I think you guys would agree with me, that entrepreneurial thinking is not innate. It's not like It's not like the baby rolls out of the womb and is like, yo, let me figure out how to make $20, you know? That's not how it works, right? That being said, I think entrepreneurial thinking is hard to teach, but I think it's easy to learn. And I say it's hard to teach because you can read case study after case study, but those case studies only tell you what the result of this was. It's very difficult to teach someone like, hey, here's that oh shit moment where they were about to run out of money, and here's how they felt and how they made the decision. And that's why I say entrepreneurial thinking is easier to learn. It's, the people that are closest to people that end up becoming entrepreneurs that it just sort of it sort of oozes off and people like absorb it in. So proximity, I think, kind of matters and all that. But here's where I'm going with this. We're recording this at the end of 2024. There's like a month left in the year, right? And I don't know about you guys, but for me, I wear, you can see this. I wear glasses, right? 1-800-contacts, their email drips and their text message campaigns to me, because I bought contacts from them last year, is so good. It's not, hey, time to do this. Like, they know that my prescription needs to be renewed in April. That's not what they're texting me about right now. They're saying, hey, it's almost the end of the year. If you have any HSA or FSA benefits, now's the time to use them. You might lose them. Let's burn them. All the, weirdos are going to come out of the woodwork. Like, is it right or whatever? That's not the topic of discussion. The topic of discussion is how do we help practice owners make more money? It's amazing to me that direct access is available in 40 states, 44, something. It's definitely the majority of the US states. One enterprising, entrepreneurial thinking practice owner is all it takes to test this out. Like, you should be saying, like, hey, you should be blowing out, make the insurance payer the bad guy. Okay. That guy, I know that's a hot topic right now. I'm going to get killed if I don't get killed already, whatever. But here's the thing, like, God, I regret saying that. That didn't mean that. That was, that was bad language. Sorry.
Editing.
Metaphorical.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
But what I was trying to say was that, like, let's make the insurance payer the bad guy. And what I mean by that is like, I, as a dad, I got 4 kids and a wife, like, I have to dutifully pay my healthcare and premiums every month. And God forbid, if I'm one day late, they will cancel the whole policy. What if, for example, an enterprising, practice owner created marketing copy that's like, hey, it's almost the end of the year. Get your value out of that thing. Like, come on in for a consult or, whatever. And I know I'm like paraphrasing here because it's more nuanced, but the idea is very simple, right? Like,
well, and here's where sorry to interrupt you, but I was just thinking this too, right? Like, I sent an email out this morning about like speed schools for kids and winter training, because now's the hot time to get people into working out. And I literally at the end was like, hey, and don't let your FSA and HSA money run out. You may be able to pay for this at this point at the end of it. I literally sent an email this morning.
I just did a full post on it a week ago. Like, use your FSA, use your HSA with in-home care.
Yeah. and Paul, here's the reality, right? Here's the reality that PTs aren't realizing. It doesn't matter if that person may not have an HSA or an FSA. The reality is, if they do, maybe that's what got them to come in. There's chances where they come in and it doesn't even work. All this freaking is advertising. It's like people get bought up. Well, what about this? And I don't want to be that guy. And what about this email? And what about that automation? Here's the reality. If I send an email and it has something that catches somebody's eyeballs and makes them stop, it's called good advertising. It's meant to be controversial, right? We talked about this, actually, funny enough. I have an ad out. Funny enough, you talk about technology. Meta stopped the ad. I wouldn't really put it up, but I thought it was a great ad. Whether you like them or not, I put Trump and Kamala up together, and I wrote, and here was the ad ready on the top. I go, neither of these candidates are going to help you lose 15 pounds in 2025.
That's good.
But we can right on the bottom. All that's meant to be, I couldn't give a shit about any of this. The reality is, it's just meant to catch your eyeballs for you to be like, ha, that's funny, and then read the copy and maybe come in. So it's just creating lead stuff. And so the reality is, like, to your point about HSA, FSA, like, the person who's going to say that, it's just, again, it's that paralysis by analysis I'm talking about. It's just they don't realize that they're not taking accountability for their situation, right? It's like, and that to me drives me bonkers. And that's something that runs rampant in health.
Yeah. I mean, you could summarize all of this into one statement and just say that, like, we're all fighting a war for interestingness, meaning, like, and I'll just use a very simple example. Like, we all have the same 24 hours in the day. We generally all have to sleep 6 to 8 hours of it. So we're all left with the 18 or so. And then half of that we're probably working. So now you got a third of your day left. Let's just pretend you had no other obligations. That's a finite amount of time to spend every day and decide, okay, am I buying something on Amazon? Am I driving to Home Depot? Am I going to my kid's baseball game or whatever? Or am I stopping off at my PT to get checked out, and it's a war for interestingness that we all are fighting personally and professionally. You want to know why you didn't get the job interview? It's because you're not interesting enough. It has nothing to do with your experience. Nobody reads the resume anymore. It's like, you're just boring. Why would I talk to you when there's 37 other people? As a patient, it's like, sometimes when I'm getting real cynical, I'll just like share my screen and then turn my VPN on and go to like Minneapolis, and then I'll search PT near me. And I'll then I'll open the top 10 links to, physical therapists in different tabs. And I'm like, holy cow, this is like an oversight. Like, how did somebody not even pay any attention? It's like they just assume that consumers like it. And even if the website's good, it's like, I was trained at Northwestern or Texas Tech. And I'm like, listen, I got to pick up my kids at 4, and can somebody fit me in at 3:15 because my left knee's kind of jacked? Like, nobody
Totally.
talks about that.
Yeah, the entrepreneurs of the future are, well, it used to be like, could you do websites? Could you code? All that stuff. It's going to be the people who understand content, right? It's going to be the people who understand like how to, produce it at a reasonable amount, and then make sure that they retain attention, because you're right, it's an attention economy.
Well, I'll say it even more directly. Did you guys see Gladiator 2? I like Gladiator, so it was a great movie. Everybody universally agrees it was a shit movie. But more importantly, in Gladiator 1, 25 years ago, there's a line in that movie, in the first Gladiator, that sticks with me for 25 years, largely has driven a big part of the way I think about this. In that movie, he says, whoever controls the crowd controls their freedom. And so what I would say is like, the other day I was at a investor conference, and sounds fancy, by the way, boring as hell. But I was at this investor conference, and you got to play the game every once in a while. And so somebody asked me like, well, Paul, you guys have injected all this money into your business, and what's your plan? And I was like, I don't know, I'm gonna figure it out. And that made them all very visibly nervous, of course, because we're talking about like 30-some plus millions of dollars, right?
Were your investors there?
Yeah, they were actually. And so everybody's like visibly nervous, right? And so then one of them was like, well, what about tuck-in acquisitions? And I was like, tuck-in acquisition? Well, like, what, like under my arm? What are you talking about? And they're like, well, yeah, what about like tuck-in acquisition opportunities? I'm like, what do you think I should buy? And so now I'm being a little adversarial, talking to this group. It must have been about 600-700 people that I was speaking to. And I'm like, whenever I do public speaking, I like it to be interactive, right? And so I'm like, all joking aside, what do you think I should buy? I'm curious. What do y'all think I should buy? And I won't name names, but they were like, should do this, buy this EMR, buy that, RTM company, do this. I was like, keep it going. Come on. And then as they were talking, I wrote something down. I said, like, so as I asked the question, actually, I wrote my answer down. I was like, guys, I'm going to write my answer down. It's face down on this podium. Now you tell me what I should buy. That's when everybody started talking, right? So then I let them talk, and I pull up my paper, and I said, if I was going to buy anybody in this moment without having done any diligence, I'd buy Strava. And they were like, what are you talking about? Like Strava, like they were like, Strava, like the fitness app? I was like, yeah, the fitness app. And they were like, but that has nothing to do with PT. I'm like, it has everything to do. Who, aside from like the aging population, who's the next largest population that could use physical therapy? It's like me, like I'm on Strava. I mean, we're talking like millions of users that are on there. Now imagine Strava right now is hooked into and this is the basic business case I gave people. I was like, look, guys, I don't know much, but I know this. I know that every time a patient walks into a practice, they're going to pay $100 plus or minus a little bit, probably going to come from their insurance, but it's about $100. And I pulled up my Strava app on this thing, and I was like, look at this thing. It's connected into my Apple, health kit or whatever. It knows my gait. It knows everything. And what if after I just finished my hour-long easy run, it sees that my gait is 3% off on my left side? What if it said, by the way, we noticed this, and there's the next available appointment at a PT 3 miles from you is this afternoon. Oh, by the way, it's powered by Strata PT. Holy shit, that's incredible. And so now I'll bring it back to the point of this. Like, as we think about entrepreneurial thinking and all this stuff, I think if there was somebody really enterprising out there, the big opportunity in healthcare is to figure out how to become the gatekeeper of the patients, right? Everybody wants to be the clinician. Everybody wants to be the kiosk. Everybody wants to be these things, right? But look at like home care. So I'm sorry, not home care, home services. Right now, anybody listening to this or watching this can do this right now. Open up an incognito browser and type in HVAC repair and then your zip code. And what you'll find is in most of these geographies around the US, the first 7 or 8 slots on Google, whether you like it or not, are all owned by the same company. And what they're doing is they're basically lead aggregation sites. So you click that link and it says, we have 87, HVAC guys ready. They don't. If you read the fine print, when you put in your phone number, they are auto dialing 7 HVAC people simultaneously, charging those people $20 each for the lead for the opportunity to press 1 and connect with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's starting in physical therapy. I get these emails all the time.
And those are multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies now. I mean, we've sold a couple of our portfolio companies to them. And I think it's a matter of time before we see that in healthcare. And I think it's going to start with outpatient-y kind of stuff. It's going to be, optometry, dentistry and PT, OT, speech, that sort of stuff. I know I'm not that articulate today, but when I go back to one of those 2 assertions I made about this being the place and the way that practice owners could make the most money, this is an example of what I mean by it, is that ultimately, you guys this is a captive audience. I mean, and the audience never gets smaller. It actually kind of always stays the same, kind of gets bigger. And so it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm just too much of a capitalist here, but I think you can have both. I think you can make a lot of money and you can make a lot of people feel better. I'm not a trained psychiatrist or psychologist or anything like that, but I have this theory. If you think about, just in broad strokes, if you think about how hard it is to make it through these educational programs, and you sort of joked about it, right? But but all joking aside, there's a financial component to it. There's also a sort of a mental component. You have to want to do this because otherwise there's easier ways. You can get easier degrees out the door and get back to work, right? What happens is that the people that then make it through, they're predisposed to think a certain way. It's a 0 fail kind of thing. In the engineering world, we're kind of taught trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, right? That's not how we want medical professionals trained. Obviously, we don't want them trialing and erroring, And so it's good. So the good news is
this works.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The good news is that's why I think, for example, the US education system does pump out great medical professionals across all disciplines. I think generally speaking, that's why it is so good. Gotta make a dad cliche. The sword always has 2 sides. The other side of this is that it's very difficult for people that are trained that way to think entrepreneurially, because in entrepreneurship, if we knew what the next LinkedIn was going to be, or if we knew what the next big thing was going to be, we wouldn't have to trial and error anything. We would just do that, And so I think the real exercise, as we think about and I forget how you said it a few minutes ago, Owen, but I think the real exercise is how do we show people that entrepreneurial thinking is not about dumb luck or being smarter than anybody or whatever. You need degrees in medicine to be really successful. But if you look at some of the greatest entrepreneurial stories, let's just use financial outcome as a measuring stick. If you look at the greatest financial the greatest entrepreneurial outcomes over the last 20, 25 years, the public story is always grit, determination, whatever. That is not true. It's about iteration and the willingness to look dumb and try a bunch of stuff.
Innovation.
PhysioGrowth is a mastermind group targeted at the same people that you're talking about, right? Where you're looking at the very altruistic clinic owner and they're stuck in a position where it's okay, but this can't keep going, right? I'm too busy. How do I grow my practice, right? And how do I get bigger? And how do I get to a point that I can help as many people as possible? And I think that what you're talking about is the sort of thinking that needs to happen from the leader of a company, right? But is not the sort of thinking that you want from your PT. And if they're spending their whole time treating, right, they don't have the ability to just sit and stare at the wall and be like, you know what would I do here? Or maybe
Yeah.
let's try this out, or
Yep.
let's learn a new thing. And they have to see that education is an investment, right? That education, the best investment they can make, at least at this point, when maybe they don't have millions of dollars, is to invest in themselves and their education, be able to build themselves up, and then be able to kind of step back and say, oh, if I just, for instance, raise my prices, then a few people drop off, I get some time, I can think about marketing, and then maybe I can get more money for a bigger location. Those types of
Yeah.
day-to-day things,
Yeah.
all the way up to what you're talking about, where it's like, how do we figure out like how these two worlds collide, and the EMR and the, regulation bodies and the hospitals, and we make it so that everyone comes to their PT for every sniffle, cough, and broken knee. So I think that it's important to say that, like, people are trying, right? And unfortunately what happens is you got to get to that, almost to that burnout point, before you start looking for help.
I would agree with that last statement. You got to, a lot of people right now are crying uncle before they get there. Right. And the reality is, like, you can pay in two ways. You can either pay with time or with money. Right. And the reality is, if you're going to be, somebody who wants to make more money in the profession or do something, I think you nailed it, Paul, when you're just saying, like, a lot of people where they aren't trial and error in terms of doctors and what they're trying to do. And as they're trying to go through more of the different stuff, and like that also just leads to a totally, innate way of thinking that's completely opposite of what entrepreneurial is in any capacity, right? Which is trial and error, innovating, changing. Does this work? Nope. Pivoting. Okay, don't be afraid of failure. That guy said no. Who cares? Fuck them. Let's go on to the next one, right? Like, it's the same exact thought process of just like, it's a bit of chaos, and then the chaos starts to build structure, and you're building structure around it, and you become just hardened to the tough atmosphere that is around there, to the point where, like, it does somewhat make you unbreakable to a certain degree. I'm sure, like, it just makes it feel much less, it's more about endurance and not quitting than it is about, like, being the most brilliant guy in the room, unless you're Elon Musk, then it changes. But in terms of that aspect, right? But
well, yeah, and I want to be respectful of your all's time, but I would just, I don't disagree, but I just want to, like, maybe shape what you just said there a little bit. Is that, there's a certain type of work required to get a business to start, whether it's a tech startup, a healthcare practice, a real estate firm, it's all the same. There's a certain amount of work and brute force that's required to go from 0 to 1. The subtle but really important distinction I just want to make to just shape what you just said there, though, is that to go from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, whatever the proverbial target is a different work. And
Totally
that's
agree.
the thing people need to understand, is because it's not about, like, that's why I disagree slightly with this idea of endurance, because like if I'm running a marathon and like something's feeling off and I just grit and endure it, like, yeah, I guess David Goggins would be really happy with me, but I'm probably going to get hurt. I'm probably going to burn out. I'm probably going to regret it for the next 8 weeks.
There's a more scientific way to approach it, to your point.
Right. Yeah. Maybe like, if like the smart thing to do might be to just DNF, just, hey, you know what? Today's not the day. Or, and I'm making this up just for the sake of time, maybe it's let me change my stride or something like that. There's no good answer. All I'm just trying to say is endurance, like, I don't think is the right way to think about this, because that's how you burn out. That's how you get cynical. That's how most companies. So I think the saying, or I think the statistics are, less than 4% of companies make it to $1 million in revenue. Why is that? Well, 99% of the time, I think it's because they just make something people don't want. But we're talking about medicine here. We're talking about outcomes. We're talking about, like, stuff that this isn't an innovation. This is, like, real. You don't have to prove that PT works. You just have to carve out your little kingdom. And anyway, there's something in there. We should do a show on that sometime.
Well, I think you're referencing, like, the founder's paradox, right? Where, like, you have your Uber Kalanick, right? And he was great at, figuring out how to get Uber off the ground, but then he completely botched it when he had to make nice with everyone else, right? But then the counterpoint, Zuckerberg, right? Like, he's made a pivot, right? Now, there's arguments, is he the best possible thing? And he has a lot of ownership. Bezos, same thing. But, like, those are the things where I think there's ways to do it, but you got to know yourself, right? Yep. Can you learn? Yep. Can you adapt? Can you change yourself? Can you mold yourself? And those people endure, right? Yep. Other people very much know that they can't, or in Travis Kalanick's place, he gets taken over. But smart people will know, okay, this isn't my forte. I'm going to hire somebody for that. I'm going to get a professional CEO. I'm going to get some of those things. So those are the high level business decisions that, I mean, maybe the guy from NovaCare has had to make prior to 1990, right?
Yeah.
Like those are the things where you have a lot of PTs now who are making money. They have a market, they have a brand, they have all the stuff. And then they're just sitting there like, oh God, what do I do? Right? Why is nobody staying when I know how to treat everybody? Why don't they know how to treat everybody? And then you go, well, there's ways of dealing with personalities, and this is how we do this and all that. And, then you make the decision if that person's good at that or not. So you're right, man. It's very much, everything changes, and it changes like freaking every week. Right. And you have to have that malleability to be able to progress.
Yeah.
I feel
Absolutely.
like when I say endurance, to your point, like Schreiber, it's like like not being afraid, like don't quit, innovate, and don't be afraid of certain failures and change, right? Like changing your model constantly. And I think that's kind of the idea behind like the endurance side, right? Like to your point, even about changing, it's like, you're right. It's like because to your point, what I don't want, and what you are saying is, if you're doing something dumb, don't just keep doing it dumb, right? That's the definition of insanity, doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result, right? It's like, how do you continue to push the ball forward? How do you finish to innovate, right? How do you change what you're trying to do? And I think not being afraid of doing that is a huge piece of it. Fear is a massive, massive barrier that most people have as an obstacle that they can't overcome. And so it's like, how do I change my thought process? How do I innovate what I'm doing? How do I keep my passion and have a business out of it? Why can't I have both, right? Why can't I have my cake and eat it too? And that's where that all kind of ties together for sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.